to adopt our agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Approve the minutes as well from October 11th if you've had a chance to read them. Any changes or?
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye as well. Okay. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it's included on the agenda and public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases and other adjudicative proceedings. Thanks, Diane, for coming.
Oh, and
I was going to say I don't.
Mandy, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Mandy Rambo, and I'm a Human Resources Business Partner for the Department of Administration. So I just started in October, and TRS will be one of my divisions and agencies.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for coming,
Yeah.
Andy. Alright, so, we've got the M-Trust Phase 3 closeout discussion items.
Yes, so behind tab 3 in your packet, there's a short write-up about the closeout of the Entrust Phase 3 project, and as you all know, that was the main enhancement phase of the project. Phase 1 was the pilot project, Phase 2 was to replace all of our existing functionality we had in Plus, and Entrust Phase 3 was to add enhancements. And so that actually ended up closing out on November 8th, which happens to be my birthday, so that was good. I think Tammy was the one really doing cartwheels. But with that, I want you to flip to page 42 in your packet, because that's the Entrust budget. I just want to point out that although the formal phase of enhancements is over, we are going to continue to work on some enhancements on the system. You'll see there on page 42, that's the Entrust Phase 3 budget status report, that we actually ended the project about almost a full month before we projected. And that's great news. However, if you look up at the very top there, we had about 50,000 in TRS personal services that we surplus. That now is going to hit our regular operating budget. So when we get to the May, or we have our May meeting, it'll be a lot closer to the fiscal year end. We'll be bringing a budget amendment to fix our normal budget so that we have enough to cover our personal services, as well as we'll have some additional project management and test lead services, which are consolidated, or they'll be consolidated under Rising Star LLC. Just the one person's going to be continue to work on these handful of enhancements that we want to do at post Phase 3. If that makes sense. And a couple of them I have listed in your write-up. We're going to do what is it, online withdrawals and required minimum distribution notices and compliance for sure. And we'll do that with Alfred and Roy, our programmers. We can do that under our underlying maintenance contract. We have an ad hoc rate in there for programming that's outside of the norm. So we can all focus on our normal operating budget. And it will be part of that budget amendment. And then the biggest thing is having the contracted services for our test lead / project manager to get us through these phases. And then going into next fiscal year, when we do our budget for the following fiscal year, well, we should have scoped out what we want to try to accomplish in the next 12 months. And it'll be, on a much smaller scale than like the 2-year phases of the project. Because 1 year, these are the things we want to get done. And we'll present them to the board and decide yes or no. Like with anything, there gets to be a point of diminishing returns. At some point, it's great to fix every little tiny bell and whistle, but sometimes you're spending more than what it's actually worth from a value standpoint. We're nowhere near that right now. I mean, the things we're tackling are actually really big, and those enhancements will save us a lot of time and money in the future. Required minimum distributions right now is basically a manual process that Denise and I go through each year. And that's for people that once they hit 70.5 years old, they have to take their money, otherwise they're subject to a 50% excise tax from the federal government. So it's important that we get a hold of them. We're going to build it in the system so that they get automatic notices or generated
ask you a quick question on that, just sort of unrelated, but do they would I assume, have the option of either taking a lump sum annually for their RMDs, or they could set up a systematic distribution?
Yes. So as long as they're vested, as long as they're terminated vested members, they would qualify for a monthly distribution. And in statute, and we've actually had to do this, and we're about to do it to a couple more this year. In statute, if we can find them, that's the biggest thing, as long as we know where they're at. And if they refuse to turn in any paperwork, we can start them on a 10-year term certain. So they'll get a 10-year term certain benefit for the rest of their life, or the rest of the term. But the issue can be, we run into this a lot with some of these term vested folks, is that when we make that first retroactive distribution, because it's retroactive back to when they were first eligible for an unreduced benefit, the whole 10-year term's chewed up in that first distribution. So then they're basically on a normal form at that point. Once they decease, that benefit's over. So we really do everything in our power to try to get a hold of them, make sure they understand, look, you have the option to select, a joint full or a joint 2/3 or joint and a half to your joint, to make sure that they're aware that the 10-year cert might not be the best option for them. But they certainly can withdraw their funds as well, or roll them over. Yep.
On the average, how many folks are we talking about?
So we're talking about this year on the list total, so there were about 8 that were past their required beginning date, so that means that they were all over 70 and a half as of April 15th for a year, essentially. But then there were another about 12 that are approaching it, so we probably sent out about 20 in total.
How many that are beyond their unreduced benefit age but haven't elected benefit yet?
So all of these, because they're all 70. So
How many is there? But there's a bigger subset of people that are not 70 yet.
Oh, yeah.
But is that a huge number?
I haven't queried that. I would imagine it would be, fairly substantial. It wouldn't be, it's the term, primarily what we're talking about is people that are terminated invested and have maybe had no interaction with us for quite a while.
Yeah, a lot of people forget.
Right.
You might have 1, 5, 6, 7 years of service in the
Yeah.
system.
Right.
Yeah, generally, they'd be the ones that have the smaller amounts.
Generally, although we've had to retire some folks that have over 30 years onto the 10-year term certificate because they just won't turn their paperwork in.
Wow.
And they're not working anymore.
Right. So, our laws cover it. It's been contemplated and it's in our statutes, what we do and when we do it.
So, I don't know, some people get something in mind. I'm not gonna take my social security till 70, so they don't
So,
do
yeah.
any of the other stuff.
Right.
Or they're suffering from dementia or something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what Okay, so then, that's just kind of some information on the budget. We can flip through this is the final interest enhancement report, the monthly status report that Jane Forney did for us prior to her second retirement from the project. And you can see that the project actually went very well. The overall status ended up green. We actually ended up a little bit ahead of our revised schedule and ahead of our revised budget, although we talked about that, the budget is going to come back the way. You can see listed on pages 18 through 22, those are the additional enhancements that were added to the project scope as we went through. It's hard to think of everything, but you can see that in total, those PCRs stands for project change request. In total, it was only $52,000 over a couple of years. That's really not bad. We tried to keep it to a minimum, and that was paid out of our interest budget, so those costs were covered. On page 24, it's kind of an interesting graph. You can see our development deliverables versus the plan versus actual. Plan was in blue and the actual was in red. That's, I think, a pretty good depiction of the project kind of went as it was planned to go. Of course, the budget status was green and the project risks were green. And then starting on page 28, through 30. Those are the 68 requirements, or not requirements, there were way more requirements. Those are the 68 deliverables, so DAR, deliverable accepted requests. So we had 68 distinguishable items delivered and tested by both developers as well as our test team. And in each of those, there could be, each one of those deliverables could have up to, 60 requirements in it. So there was a lot of work that's been done on the system over the past couple of years. Are there any questions about where we stand today and where we're planning to go? Like I said, I will be bringing some additional funding requests forward, both to finish out this fiscal year related to personal services and then contracted services. But I wouldn't expect it to be more than the 156 that we saved in the trust project. It just needs to move over to our regular operating budget. And then we'll scope out and have specific deliverables as well as cost estimates for what we want to try to accomplish next fiscal year.
It's a major accomplishment behind you. Did you have a party?
We did have a party. We had a luncheon, yes. And unfortunately, Tammy's not here today, but Tammy has been instrumental in getting this trust project done, as well as kind of lean on a lot of the staff. Darla has done all the online help, which it's you can click inside the system and pull up why the system is asking for what it's asking for and what it does when you enter it in. So it's a great improvement over what we have.
Thank you. There's some time for public comment too. Diane, would you like to?
I'd just like to say thank you for all the enhancements, and I'm pleased the project went so well. Our members are being served well by the enhancements and the use and all the work that Darla has done. I think will help answer their questions as well. So thank you all.
And the only other thing I'd leave you with is we have those for sure two things, the required minimum distributions and the online withdrawals. But we would really like to explore further moving to more online transactions. So like the big one that comes to mind is getting to an online retirement application.
That would
eventually
very nice.
Yes, it would be nice.
Have some autofills in there.
Autofills, and then having the member enter the information. I think we cut down greatly on trying to read a paper form and type it in. Having our staff do that also would save time. So
That seems like a big part there.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, with so much paperwork that it is.
Right.
On to then the legislative committee updates.
Okay, so on page 31, I have a short paragraph there about sort of recent legislative activity. I presented the evaluation results to SAVA at their October 29th meeting. I'm scheduled to present to the Legislative Finance Committee next week on the 17th, as well as the Legislative Subcommittee on December 16th. So the Legislative Finance Subcommittee. So they have a subcommittee for local government and pensions, is what it's called. And that committee is supposed to be doing a deep dive into local government budgets and pension funding, and then reporting back to the Legislative Finance Committee. It's unclear really. They've had one meeting so far, and I did attend that. It was a little bit of a different meeting. Everyone was invited to come sit at the table, and it was there wasn't a lot of structure to it. So I'm presenting the evaluation results to both of those committees next week. And then in January, they're going to have what they're calling a legislative week. So my understanding is they're testing the waters on what it might be like to have annual sessions where you have 1 year you do policy, and the following year you do budget, or vice versa. I'm not sure which way. I'm sure that I shouldn't say I'm sure. It would likely start. It would likely start with policy and then budget, but who knows? Maybe it's the opposite of that. And then, so during legislative week, they're going to have a pension track, and so Dory and I, Director Schwinn and I, are both scheduled to be at those meetings. I haven't been invited yet, but I would imagine that will be as we get closer, and I think they're gonna want to hear from us at some point during that legislative week. Either way, the specific pension type meetings, I will be in attendance, and if I need to get up and speak during public comment, I will.
If I were to guess anything there, because they're still required to have a 2-year budget, that they would still meet on the odd years to do budgets,
Yeah.
whether that's first, second, however you want to look at it, but I would say it would be the odd years, so.
Yeah, I think that's right, exactly right.
Unless there's a way for them to somehow make money in the change.
Yeah, well, they're required to have a 2-year budget. Whether that can be switched to the even years or not, I suppose it's possible. And save that money by being able to.
So there is, there's a draft report that was done by, it's called the Pension Integrity Project, which really is an offshoot of the Reason Foundation, which I've seen, and there are a handful of legislators that have seen that report as well. I don't know if the Reason Foundation will be in attendance during legislative week. There was talk of having them come, and then there's been talk about them maybe not coming. So that's why I'm gonna keep a pretty close tabs on what they're discussing, who they're discussing it with, and if we need to bring in our actuaries at some point, then we'd be willing to do that. I'm planning to offer that up if we need to for the legislature to hear from our actuaries instead of somebody that's looking at overall, numbers and then trying to, apply whatever formula they came up with.
We need the actual data and history of our pension system, and not what somebody thinks could or would happen.
Yep. Any questions about legislative committees?
It's just too early to talk about.
I know.
Exactly.
They'll be here before we know it. Okay.
All right, then we're on to mass meeting update.
Yes, so the Montana Association of School Superintendent regional meetings have been underway. I've attended 5 of them up to this point. I logged 1,050 miles in a state car this week already.
Wow.
Poplar and back, and then to Great Falls and back. They've actually been going very well. When I first went out to Northeast Mass, which the very first time I attended it was in Glasgow, they were pretty tough on me. They were at that point in time, a lot of the restrictions on working retirees were pretty new. The 150-day break was just not beginning to be implemented. That went into effect January of 14. They were kind of bitter, for lack of a better word. They've really gotten a lot better. I think it takes a while for regulations to become the new normal, right? You're really upset at first, but then over time you sort of get used to it and adjust to it. So those meetings have, especially that group, the meeting I had with them this Wednesday was great. I mean, they were actually pretty receptive. They are still struggling to fill slots in classrooms in rural Montana. I mean, there's no question. Their only ask of us is, whether or not there's any flexibility we can provide with using resources that are in the community, which are the working retirees. Of course, I said, that's part of what I'm doing. I'm out here listening, trying to find out from you all what issues you're facing. They are using a lot of workers from the Philippines out in eastern Montana. They have some kind of an exchange program going. They say that they're subject matter wise, they're really pretty strong with classroom management. They struggle with managing, the personalities in the classroom, mostly because they don't want to offend their American students. They would never let their Philippine students get away with the same kind of activity. So they are using quite a few of them. They all understood that their wages are reportable at TRS. Part of what they have to do is get a Social Security number to work, and they all were aware of that. Most of them, unless they find someone and get married are not gonna vest. They can only work up to 3 years because they come back under another visa, but they can take their funds with them, you know, they can withdraw their funds with them when they leave one together. And then the other big challenge that I'm hearing from them is just on the licensure side. They may have people that they could get to come to their city, but they can't, the licensing piece prevents them sometimes from being able to hire those folks, from what I understand. And I don't know a lot about that, so.
You've heard of suggest that it's the pay that's the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Maybe
it's-
that's part of the problem. The other part of it is, there is a way to get that license, they want to put in
Yeah.
2 or 3 years to do it.
Right. And so there were a couple of them at the NEMAS meeting that talked about, you know, on the East Coast of the United States, there's basically a teacher surplus, but those folks don't want to leave there, and it's really hard to get on. So they've been trying to canvass those areas with that, you know, their open positions. The one lady said, you know, she did pretty extensive advertising out there. She did 1 application, and it's probably because of the pay. And, you know, and
Move to
the
middle of
location.
nowhere, Montana, and don't get paid enough.
And granted, in the east, the cost of living is higher than out here.
Right.
So the pay has to be higher, but if they expect you to come here for half
Right.
of what you make there, like, nobody's gonna.
Up and, yeah.
Yeah.
And the only comment I've heard about the foreign teachers is there are schools that are complaining that the language barrier is somewhat of an issue.
Yeah, they did mention, because they were, you know, I sit through their whole meeting, and they were amongst themselves, were talking about how, you know, you really gotta make sure you do a phone interview, make sure that the language side is strong enough. Yeah. So the other, you know, the main message I'm trying to convey when I'm out there is, you know, why the DEB plan is valuable, and that they should really promote that when they're recruiting for teachers, and even with their existing employees for retention. You know, why is that DEB plan important? And they seem to be receptive to that. You know, they're all, when you're meeting with superintendents, they're all participants at TRS, and they're all employers, so they just need to see it from both lenses. You know, both you yourself as an individual, you understand how important having a defined benefit for the rest of your life is, but also as an employer, you need to understand that that's basically part of your compensation package, is deferred compensation. You know, take credit for it, promote it. And they do seem to be receptive to that, and then I'm urging them to speak to their legislators, their local legislators, and make sure that they understand they value their defined benefit plan.
I'll be honest, when I was a brand new teacher, I had no idea that came with any of it. Wasn't
Yeah.
part of the application, the notice of job, here's what you might be getting, nothing, I had no idea.
I really do think they should promote it.
They should, absolutely. I mean, our state postings, I mean, there's a paragraph in every one of them that talk about, you know, the benefits package, and they do a good job of promoting our retirement plan as part of your, it's part of your compensation.
Absolutely.
You upfront, you settle for maybe less than you would earn in the private sector, but part of that is you're building for a retirement that, you know, that you can count on at the end of your career.
I mean, lifelong pay.
Right.
Think about it.
So, I have, like I said, I've been to 5 of the regional meetings. I have 4 remaining. I'll be in Lewistown next week. And then I have, what do I have? I've got Missoula in January. Have I all been before? So I still have remaining, I've got, oh, I see, I didn't list the first ones, yeah. So I still have Lewistown next week, then Missoula, Billings, Kalispell, and then I'll finish up in Miles City in February. And when I'm out in Miles City, I'll also do a Ready, Set, Retire presentation for our members from 4 to 6. And I did one of those in Bend. I'm like dropping them. I spent too much time on them.
The Haver?
Haver, yes, in Haver I did, I went and met with the superintendent, so I did a Ready, Set, Retire presentation.
Well, that
It was good, there wasn't very many attendees, there was only probably 10, 12, no, about 12 members came to the entire presentation. And then attendance at the superintendent meetings is, it can be kind of hit or miss. Four Rivers, which is, fairly good size, there's a lot of districts in that Four Rivers, there was only about 8 attendees. Yesterday in Great Falls, for the Central Mass, there were about 25, 26, so just depends
Go
what
to a
else
big
is.
town.
Yeah, well, it just all depends what's going on. Four Rivers, we met in Bozeman.
Are they open meetings? Is that, are they?
Yeah, I think they're doing that part of it. So, I mean, I start every one of them, I say, if you get nothing else out of this presentation, it's, I can run about a half-hour presentation. It's on the very first page is my direct phone number and my email address. And if you have any, you either don't mind having any questions about whether a position's reportable or retirement incentive, whether a retired member is eligible to work for you, call them. And they seem to be listening, so.
Good.
Where? I'd have to look at my meeting request.
I'm just curious.
I don't remember offhand. I already have it on my Outlook, on my calendar with the location listed. But I can let you know after.
Would you like to comment on that, Diane?
Here's my comment. I really appreciate Mr. Graham going out to meet with superintendents. I think it will make a big difference in our members' understanding through the translation of information to get directly from superintendents, which sometimes is excellent and sometimes could use some improvement. Also, encouraging them to talk with the legislators is a wonderful thing. It's the best information comes from a local constituent to a legislator. We can do a lot, but I think the work that's done with them speaking to legislators directly with an understanding, a better understanding of our system, I think it's very helpful. In terms of the teacher shortage, your chair is right, a lot of it is salary. There are also not a lot of teachers going into the pipeline right now in colleges. So we're looking at a profession that's going to need to be shored up. And both by a positive environment for our teachers and general acceptance of public education and an understanding of what it does for not only students but the society. So we have a lot of work to do there. And while we welcome teachers into the community, we need a long-term solution to a teacher shortage. And so we haven't found that yet. Pay will make a difference. Something to control healthcare will make a difference. So thank you very much, Sean.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add real quick is that those superintendent groups are, for the most part, there are a few younger superintendents, but for the most part, they're all eligible already to retire. So that group as a whole is definitely drained. So they need to bring in some new blood through the ranks to fill those spots somehow.
All right, so we are on to administrative business. Jeff, do you have an investment report for us?
You can see in the paragraph in the agenda that we've been in the positive again for a while, been getting better the last several months. As you may have seen in the papers, I see from August through October in not just teachers' retirement, but all of the consolidated retirement plans, there's been over a $200 million increase in holdings. Again, hopefully, starting today, this month stays above zero and continues with those earnings. One of the important issues I mentioned at our last meeting was that the chief investment officer had resigned and taken another job. Currently, the application process is underway, so we're taking applications at this point. in that interim time, Director Villa developed what he called his cabinet. So in each of the asset classes, there's kind of a head and other individuals that work with that particular class. And so he's taken the heads of each of these classes, and they meet regularly as this cabinet to discuss all the issues and mostly by consensus, since there isn't a CIO, to get to the strategies. One of the issues you may remember 6 months or so back was the CIO wanted to start this diversified strategy as an asset class by itself. And mostly those were long treasuries and some other things that he could liquidate quickly that were safe. But as they analyze it, most of that stuff was already in most of these other asset classes itself. So one of the things that's taking place when you look a couple of pages forward is that we're deleting that diversified strategy as an asset class by itself, since all of those things are actually in the other asset classes. When we started looking at cash, usually that would be in STIP, but really each of those asset classes itself had a certain amount of cash in it, clearly for good reason, but it was far more than we really felt was needed. It seems that it was about, if you looked at all of them together, almost 6% of the holdings was cash, which was no interest, almost 6%. So as of our last meeting a few weeks ago, they're down to 3.6% overall in all of these. STIP holdings for most of the retirement plans, teachers included, was around 3%. It's now down to about 1.68%, which is still virtually a year's worth of required cash to pay out benefits, which of course comes from other sources as well. So the goal there, I think, is to be less than 1%. So you take that 2% return now and hopefully kick it up into something that's 3 to 9 to 12%, depending on which market. That clearly should increase the amount of interest that we earn on an ongoing basis. So that is the impetus for the change in these asset classes. If you looked on page 38, this is an asset allocation chart, and this goes with our policies moving forward. What's missing there is diversified strategy, which I already explained. You can see in some of the notes that the high yield that was in the old strategy really combines several of those now, and we're going to call it non-core fixed income. Same for core fixed income. It includes broad fixed, treasuries, investment grade credit, and that's explained as in that document. The part that isn't explained real well, number 1 under this table talks about midpoints, and this has to do with the cabinet that I was mentioning. So what they're going to do, at least for the time being, is literally take a mathematical midpoint between looking at domestic equities, for example, 24 to 36. If we're above or below the midpoint of that during those cabinet meetings, they need to discuss and defend why we're either above or below, and make sure that everybody thinks that that's the right way to go. Just get consensus again, and make sure that there's enough input that they're doing some knee-jerk reactions to changes in markets, or since there isn't a CIO, and clearly everybody has their own feelings on strategy, it continues to be collaborative and moving incrementally.
Is there a developing consensus about the general shifts away from or towards those midpoints with different asset classes? So, for example, over the next 2 or 3 quarters, has there been discussion about which particular asset classes they maybe want to augment and which ones they might want to diminish?
Yeah, that's been part of the process for the last 6 or 8 months for sure with this, and probably with the CIOs, but it's been way more transparent because they're having those conversations in these big groups instead of maybe just the director, the CIO, period. So yeah, the
So these
discussions are.
These ranges were selected specifically to target a midpoint, which is the asset allocation that we're targeting is the midpoint between all of these?
So yes and no.
Okay.
They were selected because they're almost exactly what it was prior to this. And then I think they evened them up so that the midpoints wouldn't be that half. They didn't say it that way, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. So they're within 1 point up or down from where they had been for the last year, with the exception of cash, I believe.
So it used to be accepted investment allocation theory that different asset classes had were directly uncorrelated. So bonds, for example, were not correlated with equities. Over the past 10 or 15 years, that theory has been turned on its head because just about everything goes in the same direction now all the time. Has there been much discussion about that? Because when these ranges were originally set up, I'm assuming that it was to try to create an asset allocation profile that had the greatest possible reward, but the lowest possible risk. Has there been much ongoing discussion about that?
Consistently, yeah.
Okay.
Our consultant, RBK, analyzes those things, and every quarter we get a correlation report, and they're calculating all of those.
Okay.
So yeah, it's consistently in front of them.
Are you impressed with that?
RBK is fantastic.
Okay.
They explain things so I can understand it. And they don't mind going over things a couple of different times. They work well with the staff. The staff's really impressed with them as well. It seems to be really good, pertinent information. They'll give you their honest opinion on things that you sure with all the data that they can calculate. They've got a crazy amount of information. We visited Portland at their offices, and they've got a large number of people in intellectual property, their own formulas, algorithms for doing all this stuff. I think it was pretty impressive.
Good.
They're just nice people.
They help with asset class projected returns going forward here. They're pretty conservative, it seems like, the numbers
I
actually.
agree with you totally,
Yeah.
because our last one, just this last meeting, they look at 10 different scenarios with these correlations and what to expect, and their shot at what we should reasonably expect to earn was like 6.5%. I can look and find a specific number, but that was in the ballpark. But you still have, that was the 50-50 range of hitting 7%. There's still a 40% chance you hit 12%. I mean, it really varies.
And the advantage that they're in Portland is that it's so cloudy, they have very few distractions.
Right. They have a whole floor of this building, and that's all they do. It's been a good experience, and really there's a lot of work that people do into this. I'm impressed that they do as much as they do.
So financial statements, Nolan, and budget reports.
Chair, members of the board. So what we just went over with the investment statements was as of October 31st. Obviously, so we're about a month behind here, and these financial statements are also as of October 31st. So I have just yesterday, I kind of completed the November 30th one. So November was a little better month. So I think that's a good sign. Everything's moving in the right direction. So on this balance sheet, obviously, as of October 31st of 2018, our total, assets were actually a little higher than they are as of October 31st of 2019. And that's just due to, the markets you know, over that period, and obviously paying out all our benefits during that time. So on the fund balance, you'll see the revenue, you know, is negative. Revenue over expenditures in comparison to last year. So about a $70 million difference there. And I'll just let you know, as of November 30th, it actually is in the positive. So it's about $8 million roughly. So like I said, kind of heading in the right direction, and our you know, our end fund balance is actually you know, growing versus shrinking, you know, as of November. So you won't see that here on these October statements, but so that's a good sign. And then all that's kind of, you know, attributable. You can see, you know, on the page 41 there, the investment revenue by source. It's all kind of attributable. You can see the total investment revenue is just down year over year, and so that's where all of the, you know, the swing comes from. Our benefit payments and everything, you know, administrative expenses and withdrawals are all pretty consistent, except for that investment revenue. So, any questions on the financial statements themselves? We already touched on page 42 here. You know, Sean discussed the Entrust Phase 3 budget. I had to double check these numbers, and you know, this is the final numbers. There shouldn't be any more expenses that hit the Entrust Phase 3 project. So we ended up with a surplus a little over $150,000 in the project. That said, moving on to the operating budget, like Sean also discussed, since, you know, there was several pay periods that, you know, we finished a little early, so several pay periods that, you know, were supposed to hit the project that now hit the operating budget. You know, it's going to end up with a little bit of a deficit in our personal services that we've budgeted for. You know, this is as of October 31st, but as of November, it's, you know, it's going to be closer around 20,000. Maybe a little more, you know, once our 1% raises kick in here which obviously it's only 1%, so it's not going to be a huge jump. But and then the obviously the harder one to predict than personal services is the operating expenses. So this is projecting roughly 35,000 deficit in operating. I would expect that to be, you know, pretty consistent. Just kind of depends on how spending goes. We do not have the, you know, all the expenses that we'll see coming in for Monica's time, and so, you know, we'll have more time. And that's Rising Stars of here. That's the contractor that we will work with for going forward on the Entrust enhancements. So those, you know, obviously in May we'll have a better projection of what we'll need to come to the board with, but.
And the one, the operating expenses you say are difficult to predict because we've moved into this new facility. Is that the biggest impetus?
No, we have that project, you know, because we had the lease agreement in place, and so we know exactly, you know, what our expenses are for the building. It's more just the variable costs of printing, postage, you know, those things. Just it just kind of depends on if we send out another newsletter, or if we send out, you know, things like that. They're just a little harder to project than personal services, because those are kind of, you know, what everyone's salary is, and even if they get a 1% raise, you know exactly what their salary is going to be. Things like that.
For this budget amendment that might be coming in May, of that 156,000, you know, clearly 50,000 won't be going back into that. Some of it is for the next portions that you're asking them to do, right? So for the Rising Star, so it won't be $50,000 change that we're asking for in May into the budget. Am I making any sense?
So the M-Trust Phase 3 budget status report on page 42, that was expecting us to continue to pay, 7 hours of the
Right.
deputy director and 4 hours of the technical writer through December 6th. We actually ended in November 8th. So that 50,000,
So it's kind of set.
it's
No.
gonna be pretty darn close,
Okay.
yeah. And then, so, yeah, it'll be roughly that is what we would likely be coming to the board with, just on personal services. And then, we'll have our hourly rate that we're paying, Rising Stars, Monica Arsenal for, testing and project management. And we'll have to figure out, where we're at up to that May board meeting and where we project it to also be through the end of June. And so I can't tell you what that amount's gonna be, but, I would imagine it'd be less than 100,000. So what we had as a surplus in the project, we're gonna ask for most of it back in our operating budget to get through this
I
calendar.
guess that's where I was headed, so we aren't gonna be asking for a different M-Trust budget for these next little phases, you'll just incorporate.
Oh, right, yeah, I'm sorry,
Right.
sorry, I didn't understand. Yeah, it'll be incorporated in our operating budget moving forward, yep.
Yeah, there will be no more, here within this month, likely I'll capitalize this project. So we'll start, obviously the amortization expense will start hitting our balance sheet and stuff. But, any expenses that have to do with M-Trust going forward will just be in our operating budget going
Really,
forward.
the difference is on paper, it's something we were already taking out of the system, paying whether it's this budget or this.
Right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, it's no more money, really.
Right.
Yeah, and they'll become operating, we'll no longer, capitalize those expenses or anything like that. Everyone's personal services, anyone that spends, Tammy, if she spends a lot of time still on M-Trust, it'll just hit our
That's
operating
just what she
budget.
does.
Yeah, it's kind of our normal operations going forward, so. So that's, we'll have a clearer picture, obviously, on the budget, going forward. It's always easier as the fiscal year goes on, when there's less time to project.
No,
Yes.
very, very minor point, but does the fiscal year start July 1?
It does,
Okay, so July 1 to October 31 is 4 months, right?
correct.
Which would be 1/3 of the fiscal
Yeah,
year.
it looks like I didn't update that percent of the fiscal year complete portion, so. So yeah, that would be more like 33%, is what that should say. And then also the payrolls, there's, it's probably 30% of the payrolls that are paid, so. They lag just a little bit. So. And the delinquent agency report, there's actually, I've just checked into this as of yesterday, there's no October agencies that, outstanding, no school districts that haven't paid their October report. The November reports will be due December 15th, and so I haven't checked into that yet, but everyone's been getting their reports in. I think, that process has really been
So
smooth over
those
the
three
last.
have caught up.
Yeah, those three that were, this just was as of, it looks like November 7th, so. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Noel.
Thank you.
Any other questions here?
How's your baby?
Doing well. Another one on the way.
Oh my God.
On the record now.
It's called compounding.
Is that what it's called?
I gotta step up.
All right, the NCTR annual conference report, myself and Sean and Janice went. I just want to say thank you for sending us. I had never gone to the annual conference before. I've been to the trustee conferences, and it was very different, very formal. I really enjoyed what we did, much less of, Joe from this teacher's retirement system talking to us. It was keynote speakers. It was very good information. The only thing I didn't like was the last one, and it was about health insurance.
Yeah.
And it just had nothing to do with us, and I thought, why did I sit here? But it was the only one and everything else, you know, the keynote speakers they brought in, and I'm gonna forget his name, but he was a country music, he writes country music, and I thought, this is a weird keynote speaker. And it was weird when it started, because he wasn't a speaker, and he was really just a musician who writes amazing things, and he was just so humble, and he was there to thank the teachers. He was there to, you know, tell us, you know, everybody what we've done and what you continue to do. And so there was a lot of just really inspiring things. They had the Teacher of the Year there, which I didn't expect all of this for. I didn't expect it to be more of a teacher thing.
So
it
his point was he learned to write.
He did. Well, and he was a young boy, lived in a tiny little town, and he actually dropped out of high school. And his dad was a principal.
Yeah, that's what
And so,
shocked me.
you know, he just, it was very interesting and very entertaining, and he played music for us, and I don't know, it was just a very different conference for me. We got to go see the Country Music Hall of Fame. We did a lot of great things. Where we stayed was amazing. I mean, I'll let you guys talk too, so.
When Lee Snell presented the federal legislative update, his comment was, impeachment is sucking the life out of any movement, is how he worded that. So as far as the Secure Act goes, not much movement there. I found it interesting when they were talking about boards requesting cyber audits, the problem having somebody come in and do a cyber audit and then come back to your board and present, then every one of your weaknesses has to be presented in an open meeting, so everybody now knows your weaknesses, so you have to be thoughtful about how that is done. It was. Maybe the best section was about actuarial audits, because the panel included our very own Sean.
I wouldn't go that far.
But it was interesting, because both sets of auditors talked about, you know, it wasn't a competition, it was a joint effort. And so I thought that was a good point being made. So overall, I thought it was very worthwhile.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about the actuarial audit panel was it was GRS, Gabriel Roeder, and Kavanaugh McDonald were the two actuaries. And of course, we have GRS doing an audit of Kavanaugh. Not the same individuals were on the panel, but it was interesting. And that's why they chose us to do that panel discussion.
Jeff, when we went to Harvard a couple years ago, was that the national conference?
No.
that
No,
wasn't.
That was the education one where you're.
Okay.
So-
Because Snell spoke there
Oh.
also.
Oh, yeah, yes, yes.
Yeah, both of them.
They're both good, and they're both valuable. I just was surprised
They're
this was
just
more for
different.
teachers even.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it to be such a teacher conference too.
Yeah.
It was great.
Yeah, it was, I guess I would say that there's nothing like brand new came out, which isn't all bad. There isn't any brand new federal legislation that passed. There isn't any brand new IRS requirements. There is a little bit in the actuarial world, which we're kind of all aware of already with ASO 51. But I think they did a little bit better job of making it a little bit more entertaining. They had at noon one day over lunch, they had a mind reader. What was his title?
Mind reader, yeah.
I mean, it was pretty entertaining.
They made you sit someplace where you haven't sat before, so you're with a bunch of people
Yeah,
you didn't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
They were definitely, a teacher put this together, I'm just saying.
It was assigned
It was
seating.
an element.
Assigned teacher.
Yeah,
Assigned seating.
they're a little too touchy-feely for some of us high school people.
Yeah, but I mean, so it was good. And then I'm not sure if everyone gets the NCTR emails, but Maureen Westgard, who's the director, she actually just recently resigned. And so Rob Wiley, who's just retiring from South Dakota, teacher's retirement, he's the executive director. He's going to be the interim executive director of NCTR. So I know Rob pretty well. I know Rob knew Dave Sand for years and years. And NCTR shouldn't miss a beat. But just so you're aware, she did step down. I think for health reasons, but I don't know for sure.
They had 12 CEOs or CIOs?
CIOs, yeah.
on the stage at one time. speaking to us about, just their investment strategy. It was very
It was.
interesting.
Again, 12 different answers.
Oh, and really highly experienced and
Yeah.
intellectual people. That was very interesting.
And the very first keynote speaker, Howard Tolman was his name, talked about the acceleration of change in our society and how that is impacting everything.
Even his presentation was the way that, our younger generation sees things. I couldn't pay attention. It was so crazy and it went so fast.
No kidding.
He was talking about one thing and what was going on the screen was completely different, and I was just like, wow. But that's the way they see things. It's very, very different than we do. And except I need to have time to take notes, and I need to process it, and there was no processing going on. But at the end I was like, wow, it was interesting. All of it. So thank you.
And Sean was our star watcher in the blog.
Yeah, Dwight Yoakam was down there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he was hiding, he did not want to be talked to.
Nashville's wonderful too. If you've not been to Nashville,
Yeah.
loved Nashville. Loved Nashville. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity.
Board, and those of you that haven't been to an annual conference, you should see if we can do that in the next few years. It's definitely worth going.
So next is our tentative 2020 meeting dates.
I have a request on that, sorry.
That would be awesome.
I did not put enough thought into the February 14th date. That's the first day of the state high school wrestling championships in Billings. Hopefully my son may at least be there for the first day.
Well, and I was going to request the same thing because I cannot leave fourth graders on
On
Valentine's
Valentine's
Day.
Day?
I was not thinking, and in my class especially, I cannot leave. So unless the principal can be in my classroom, I can't go.
So either the week before or after works for me, so it's totally warm,
Either one's fine with me too.
That's February 21, okay. So let's put down the 21st then for February. And we have another opportunity for public comment, Diane. You can just keep talking.
Why not?
We appreciate you. And then finally, our information item is just how many regular survivorship and adjustment corrections we've had.
So anything about the other dates?
Oh, sorry.
Are they set? Are they not set?
They're just thrown out there as suggestions.
Yeah, I kind of like to have them set because
Yeah, I agree, the
Does that
farther
move
in
things
advance, the
around?
better.
Yes, spring gets a little
Speaking of which,
busier.
as I understand it, the May date would be my last date unless somehow I get authorized to be on the board again after that. Is that accurate?
I'd have to look.
I think that is.
It may be, and I'll, once we get into the spring, I'll start reaching out to the governor's office and making sure that they're aware that, that date's coming up, and we'll have that conversation.
what term is part of this year? Obviously,
We have it on our website.
I think I'm the only one.
Okay, so, yeah, July 1 of 2020, the engineering clearance is up. So I'll be reaching out to them, and if you're willing to continue to serve, I can let them know that you're interested in continuing to serve on the board.
Okay.
And then they've changed it a little bit. You have to do another application, and then they'll reach
Yeah, I
out.
had to do another
Yeah,
application.
fill out a paper.
Depends to some degree on whether or not, I still want
Well, yeah.
Definitely want it, yes.
So, yeah. And usually they're pretty good about having those, reappointing people before you actually get to the next meeting, But definitely you'll be attendance to the meeting.
May 8th looks good.
It's fine.
And and even going into August.
That's hard to say.
I might just be at the lake, sorry guys.
You can meet there.
Well, that
We
one's.
could. I'll invite you.
Offsite.
We can
That's
do
kind
it.
of important on my part that it's that big.
It needs to be that big?
Yeah, that would be the best day for sure.
August 7th.
Yeah.
So we just need to have a real short meeting that day to get back in time.
All right, let's look at our survivorship regular adjustment correction.
Okay, so, Madam Chair, on pages 48 through 49, this is the time period of September 1st through October 31st, so we typically don't see a lot of retirements for those months. In total, we have 33 new retirees, with an average age of 62.6, and average years of service of 15.5. So a lot of those would be term vested members for the most part. Decided to submit their paperwork. There are a few early retirements in there, a couple. Any questions?
All right, we're right on time for a break. We can call the meeting back to order then, and we're on to the summary of legal issues, Denise.
Okay, so at this point, again, we have two contested case matters pending. We have the Mark Thane matter, which is the cash in lieu of a fringe benefit that you heard, I think, 2 board meetings ago. We have a scheduling order in that now with the hearings examiner appointed. And so, right now we're in the discovery process. Again, with contested case matters, I'll update you on the process, where we're at in the process. We can't talk the law or the facts involved in the case due to prohibition on ex parte communications. But if you have questions or that, you can contact the Drake law firm, call Mike, whatever, he can answer any questions you might have. The other contested case matter, of course, that we have continuing is Mr. Zabrocki. The last board meeting that we talked about procedurally where Zabrocki was at, we had filed a motion to dismiss a claim in his petition for judicial review based on the constitutional. There was a motion in limine pre-hearing. It was specifically attached to the board's final determination that we're adopting that determination on the motion in limine. He brought that back as a claim for relief in his petition for judicial review. We filed a motion to have that dismissed from the petition for judicial review because it's not an issue that this board can address. The motion was granted. I think the last time we talked, I indicated that there would be like a 30-day time frame for Mr. Zabrocki to appeal that order. I always forget, there's actually a 60-day time frame for an appeal of a matter where a state agency is involved. The 60 days has run now, and Mr. Zabrocki, we've not been served with a notice of appeal on that. So I have filed a motion with the district court now to set a scheduling conference for an overall briefing schedule in the underlying petition for judicial review. So we're still months out from a final determination, but things are moving along as far as I know. He has not appealed the the dismissal order, nor have we been served with a separate legal action on the constitutional claim. So, again, prohibition on ex parte communications, because there is always, till that case is finally determined, always the possibility that some part of it will be remanded to you for review or additional action. So the prohibition still is in effect. But again, I'll make coffee if you have any questions.
And one thing on his case, his benefit has been adjusted, so we're not, I mean, that accrual of interest and all that has stopped. His benefit's been adjusted. It'll stay that way unless or until we're told otherwise by a court.
Yep, exactly. There are no other substantial pending legal issues. Again, unless Mr. Barrier comes back and says a later time, but I think that's well briefed in this packet of materials, and I don't,
He's not an outstanding case though,
He
right?
is not. He
It's
is
just,
not.
it's been determined, I mean, that's where I was kind of like, this isn't still hanging over us.
It's not, and just really quickly, there's always the possibility, even after somebody, of course, has had a contested case matter with us, that we could still do something incorrectly and give them, maybe we didn't give him his GABA adjustment 1 year. I mean, we still have to address new issues that come up. And with some people, it's very difficult to figure out what they're trying to tell you their concern or their problem is. In this particular case, he asked about his understanding that after 10 years, the adjustment of his benefit would be done, and it would be recalculated as, it should have been calculated, I think was his terminology, which that issue has been dealt with in his case. The correct adjustment of his benefit and TRS's means of recovering the amount owed by him was addressed in a district court decision and could have been appealed in Farrier 3, the third trip to the Supreme Court. So it's, as far as the law is concerned, it's done. So there's.
Denise, on another issue, 3 years ago or so, in the IR requested, that journalist requested a list of all of our members. Was there any article ever written, or was there any consequence that you're aware of that ever occurred from that?
Not that I'm aware of.
There wasn't, no.
Nope. Odd.
Yeah, it was not.
So, as far as, outstanding legal issues, unless you have questions or that about, that's pretty much it.
So then we're on to the board training, which is also you, Denise.
Fun part. Can we change the order of these two
Sure.
items again? I'd like, because I think the per diem election is quick and painless. Get that out of the way at this point. So in I passed out clean copies of this form. Per diem election, of course, state ethics law prohibits state employees or public employees from receiving compensation from two public employers for the same period of service. So for those of you who are both TRS Board members and employees of a school district, you have the option of either taking your per diem compensation from TRS, that's for the day of the meeting. It's assumed that you do your preparation for TRS board meetings in your non-working hours, so your per diem for board prep is not at issue. But you can either take your per diem payment from TRS, not receive compensation from your school district or your other public employer for that period of time, or you can take your compensation from your public employer, your other public employer, and not receive the per diem payment from TRS, or you can receive them both and reimburse your public employer for the $50 payment from for the per diem payment from TRS. Janice did ask me the question before the meeting started, whether her retirement benefit from TRS constitutes compensation for public employment that has to be considered here. It does not. It's compensation for current employment, not deferred compensation for past employment that's at issue. So, does anybody have any question about which line item on the form pertains to them? For Mr. Chamberlain and Mr. Trost, of course, they're public participants on the TRS board and not receiving other public compensation.
Unemployed by a public employer.
Pardon?
I said unemployed by a public
Correct,
employer.
right. So any questions on the per diem election form? Those come to me, I put them in a file. We have them, if there's a violation of this requirement, this ethical requirement, it's reported to the, the ethics police, but the campaign, Jonathan
Commissioner
Vogel,
of
Commissioner of Political Practices. Yes, thank you. I've got a couple. Yep, we're good. Okay, I also passed out, so I'm sorry, Madam Chair, onto the ethics training then, a copy of the annual statement, disclosure of conflicts of interest, ethical conduct and conflicts of interest, which we will go over quickly after we go through the training. If you recall, last regular board meeting, we had training on fiduciary duties, which includes a fairly strong component on conflict of interest. We sort of short-circuited the conflict of interest training in that segment because we knew this was coming up this time around. But with that being said, we've been through a substantial portion of the ethical conduct with respect to fiduciary duties conversation in the very recent past, so we won't spend a huge amount of time on it today. The state of Montana has a substantial public employee ethics policy. It is a number of administrative rules and expressed as a policy that's available on the state website. You've all been provided with a copy of it in the past. I don't hand it out every year because this policy in fact incorporates substantially all of those requirements, and then is a little bit more because as fiduciaries for a retirement system, your ethical requirements venture into the fiduciary duty realm, which is, in excess of what most state employees have to deal with. So this policy was drafted to incorporate all of those requirements. Really quickly, we'll go through a couple of the definitions. So advancing a private interest is if you take an official action or perform any other act related to your responsibilities in administering the retirement system, which has the primary or subsidiary effect of furthering the private interest of TRS personnel, which includes you, your family member, or a close friend of yours. You take the actions you take with respect to the TRS board, members of the TRS board, for the sole benefit of the retirement system as a whole and our members and their beneficiaries. So your objective is not to benefit yourself or benefit family members or friends in the actions that you take. I'm not going to go through all of the things about business. You also cannot be involved in a business enterprise that does business with the retirement system. We won't, if you have a private cleaning company, we're not going to contract with you to clean TRS's offices. That would be a conflict of interest and a violation of your and our ethical responsibilities. Compensation is any money, economic benefit or economic benefit conferred on or received by any person in return for services rendered. You are compensated handsomely, I'm sure you would all agree, for your service on the TRS board by the state of Montana, by TRS, and you're compensated by no one else for the service you perform as a board member for TRS. That's clearly an ethical violation. A family member is your spouse or a domestic partner, your spouse's ancestor, so your parents, your spouse's parents, a brother or a sister, your children, or any descendant of any of them. So your children, your grandchildren, your siblings, your nieces, your nephews, family members are fairly clearly what we all think of as family members. A gift of substantial value under the ethics policy is an item with a value, an item or a service with a value of $50 or more. An official act or official action is a vote, decision, recommendation, approval, disapproval, or other action, including inaction, that involves the use of discretionary authority related to the administration, operations, or assets of TRS. So pretty much any vote you take, any action you take, any action you decide not to take, if that action is taken or the inaction is taken for the benefit of somebody other than TRS members in general and their beneficiaries, then it's an improper action. It violates ethics requirements, and it's a conflict of interest. There's a fairly lengthy definition of a private interest as well. That's an ownership interest in a business, a creditor interest in an insolvent business. Some of these are sort of technically, definitions that are a little hard to put your finger on, but in reality it really is. If you have an ownership interest, a control interest in another business, another enterprise, then it is a private interest. A transaction or business arrangement is any process, deal, or negotiation necessary to the conduct of the business of TRS that involves the collection, expenditure, management, or other use of TRS assets. So includes day-to-day processes and functions related to administration and operation, and provision of plan benefits, including but not limited to hiring and employing staff, contracting for goods and services, making eligibility and benefit determinations, and paying benefits or any other amounts from the assets of TRS. So pretty much everything you are called to take action on or make decisions about as TRS board members constitutes a transaction or a business arrangement that TRS is involved in, and you can't have a personal stake in those things. So the rest of the policy indicates appropriate conduct, first of all, and for the most part, that comes down to, again, you do what you do as a board member of TRS in the best interests of our members. Keep in mind as you read this policy that this applies. We do the same training annually, and a disclosure statement is done by all TRS staff members as well. So not only you, the board members, in your capacity as actual fiduciaries for the retirement system, are sort of instructed on the fiduciary obligations of the board. Our staff are as well. They're not fiduciaries of the system, but we all work with the recognition that you are, and it's our responsibility to recognize and support those fiduciary responsibilities. A few TRS staff members in certain circumstances certainly would be deemed to be fiduciaries of our members. Anybody essentially who exercises discretion with respect to the benefits owed or duties, obligations of TRS members could be determined to be fiduciaries. So we perform all duties on behalf of TRS in a fair and honest manner. Strive to provide high quality in performance and advice. Avoid any circumstance or conduct that would constitute a conflict of interest or give rise to an appearance of a conflict of interest. We go over this every year, and we've had the conversation with a couple of people today that sometimes, you know, things on their face may appear to be involve relationships with people that would give rise to a conflict of interest. For example, every time we do disability benefits, I ask you all, if you know the person, if you've had any interaction with them, if you are someone who has advocated on their behalf as a union representative, whatever the case may be, you are conflicted from taking action on their application for disability benefits. So we put that on the record. You abstain from participating in the conversation and voting on their application for retirement benefits. For, in most circumstances, for a conflict of interest, putting it on the record, mitigating it appropriately is sufficient. Most conflicts of interest aren't going to mean that you need not to be on the TRS board.
Denise, can I just
Yes.
clarify a question on that? Assuming we know a teacher, met them peripherally, but don't really have a friendship or something, how do you draw, where's that line drawn? Is it any involvement with them at all that would exclude you?
No, it really is not. It's gonna be if they are a family member, a close friend, and sometimes, you know, you develop fairly substantial friendships with people that you work with. Certainly in your professional capacity, if they are also a client of yours, that's a
Absolutely.
conflict of interest.
Right.
But just
Okay, so
knowing
just-
somebody does not, with that being said, I will tell you that I've had board members in the past that have said, I don't think it's a conflict of interest. I've said, I agree, I don't think it's a conflict of interest, but I'd be more comfortable if I didn't take action on this particular person because it could give the appearance, there could be an appearance of a conflict of interest.
You're on the side of caution.
Right, right. So, you have to refrain from financial and business dealings that would tend to reflect adversely on your impartiality or interfere with your proper performance of functions and duties on behalf of TRS. Exercise prudence and integrity in the handling and management of TRS assets. We are endlessly grateful that we have a Board of Investments in Montana. I'm endlessly grateful that we have a Board of Investments in Montana. Communicate promptly to Sean, myself, or an appropriate other board member or staff member information regarding actions or circumstances you may become aware of that may constitute a violation of this policy, a violation of law, or a conflict of interest. Use care and discretion in the handling of confidential information received or maintained by TRS. The proper handling of confidential information, of course, we have a whole separate board policy on appropriate handling and security of personally identifiable information. That policy is up for minor modification, minor amendment next session, next board meeting, and we'll do training on that issue at that point. So it's just a big circle, isn't it? You can't, yeah, it's very small. It's a technical cross-reference change. You can't use the prestige or influence of your position as a TRS board member to advance a private
That's almost fun.
interest.
Pretty popular.
Pretty prestigious, yes. People are knocking the door.
Okay, I'm glad to hear they're not, but if they ever are, use retirement system time, facilities, employees, equipment, or supplies to advance private interest or for any other personal objective. These are, of course, the shall nots. You shall not do these things. And again, these all apply to TRS staff as well. You can't use confidential information of the retirement system to advance a private interest. You can't provide confidential information to people who aren't entitled to have it. So of course, when we look at disability determinations and you see the medical record write-ups and that sort of thing, that, you know, it's done in closed session and it doesn't leave the boardroom. You can't seek, receive, or accept directly or indirectly any gift from any person or entity who is doing or may be doing business with the retirement system. Fairly simple. I was going to make this comment, never mind. You don't ask people to give you things in exchange for your official conduct as a TRS board member. You can't perform any act or conduct other than in your TRS personal capacity that you know or that you know will or may be subject directly or indirectly to control, inspection, review, audit, or enforcement by TRS or the TRS board. This does not prohibit you from taking action to protect your own interests as a TRS member. It does cause an issue with respect to board members whose other employment or undertakings may include representation on behalf of TRS members as union representatives. I mean, that, you know, it does not mean that you can't act in those capacities. It means that when you're representing somebody in those capacities, then you can't take action again when they come before the board. And in fact, it goes a little beyond that. If somebody has an issue that they're discussing with you that you think may come before the TRS board, you should not be representing them in that capacity. So, you know, in the past, whenever issues like that have come up, we get a call and we talk about it. You know, it's not that it doesn't ever come up. There are other things. So Jay, in here published, you can't publish or make any statement to the media, state administrators, legislators, or legislative staff regarding the position of TRS as an entity on political issues, etc., that it's not something that the TRS board has adopted as its position. When you're doing those kinds of things, you're doing those in your personal capacity, and you should make clear that you're doing those in your personal capacity. That doesn't stop you from presenting things that are long-standing, clearly held positions of the TRS board with respect to business of TRS, like you know, working retiree issues in general. If you have any questions about where those lines are drawn, and somebody is attempting to get information from you, engage you in conversation about topics like that, best option typically is to refer them to TRS staff to address the questions. You can't allow family, social, or other personal relationships to influence your conduct or judgment in the performance of your TRS duties. No falsifying documents or records. And you can't knowingly agree to participate in, condone, or conceal any illegal activity or violation of TRS board policy. And I don't know if we talked about in our fiduciary duties part, but there truly is for board members. And it has been not an uncharted territory in litigation issues in the recent past that when there are board members behaving badly, you have an obligation as another board member to make it known and make it stop. You can't not just not participate in it. You have to be a tattletale. Just like that. Yeah. But as a teacher, you might. We went over fiduciary duties last board meeting and the prohibited transactions and prohibition against self-dealing. Again, that's the fiduciary duty of loyalty, the exclusive benefit rule. You do not undertake business as a TRS board member either by the actions you take or by having an active self-interest in the financial dealings of the retirement system. It's both a violation of your fiduciary duty and a violation of state and TRS ethical policy. We won't belabor that anymore because I think, we go over it every year. We went over it a month ago. We'll let it rest there unless you have questions. With respect to the conflict of interest, I will say what I say every year. The best way to deal with a conflict of interest is to make sure that you don't have one. And that means whenever you have a question about another business relationship or that and whether it constitutes a conflict of interest with respect to your TRS board duties, call me up and let's talk about it. When we get to filling out this form, and I feel straight, the right answer to all of the questions on these forms is no. The right answer is the right answer, and I expect you to answer the questions truthfully, but if your answer is something other than no, then it's something that you have to disclose in greater detail, and we have to decide what the proper response to the conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest is. And again, typically, if there is actually a conflict of interest or an appearance of a conflict of interest, putting it on the record, abstaining from conversation, and voting on the issue is the right thing to do. So, just sort of in the interest of your oversight responsibility again, this same policy and sort of more comprehensive training is provided to our staff members every year. They go through the same, we spend a little more time going through the disclosure form and talking about the kinds of circumstances. As different conversation today, we were talking about what a small state it is and how small our communities are. It's really impossible to find a group of employees in a city the size of Helena who don't have some relationship with some of our members, with some of our contractors, that sort of thing. We deal with it with everybody internally, and everybody does the annual disclosures. Any questions? Any issues that anybody thinks are not sort of clear enough? Anybody? All right, so then the same definitions of that are in the annual statement. Again, if your answer to any of the questions is yes, or you think maybe the answer to the question should be yes, before you complete the form and fill it in, you may want to talk to me about that. We may be able to very quickly resolve that something is not a conflict of interest, like receiving your retirement benefit and per diem from TRS for board meetings. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Denise. Long-range planning, the strategic planning commitment worksheet.
Okay, so behind tab number 9 in your board packet is the long-range planning section of the packet. The first item in there is our strategic planning commitment worksheet. I have not made any changes to this. As you likely remember, we just recently adopted all of these changes in our as part of our strategic planning session. So there have been no updates to that at this point. We haven't just like I said, in August, we did the meeting, where we sort of revamped all of these. And then in October, we finalized them. The work is underway on most of all of these, so. Then, starting on page 71, this is the most recent information I have on the 1500 East 6th Avenue building, our old building. These are rough estimates from the architect. As you all likely remember, we did go through the legislative process last session as part of the long-range building program. We got authority only to spend up to $550,000 on the remodel of that TRS building. And what you see in front of you here is the estimate by Bjerke Architects on what they think the bids will come in at. And overall, I mean, things look pretty good. It looks like about $469,000. However, I don't know if any of you remember that the staircase on the east side of the building, that concrete staircase that goes into that little door on the side, if you remember seeing it, has a big crack kind of running diagonal right below the stair treads on a concrete staircase. It's actually starting to fall and break out even more. So it's more likely than not that if we can afford to replace that as part of this, we should. They think that's approximately $20,000. A little bit more disconcerting than that, to me at least, was when we got this far into it, and now all of a sudden they decide to get up on the roof and look at the roof, and they're telling me now the roof probably only has a year or two left on it. It would have been nice to build that in for 550 could have been 650 from the legislature's concern, and we would have had the authority to get that done. So it's possible, the very bottom line on page 73, the possible re-roof is in there with a cost of $50,000 to $60,000, and on the low side of their estimate, with their contingencies built in various areas, they think it could come in at $550,000, essentially right on budget, or potentially up to $613,000. Again, these are preliminary estimates. The actual bids from the contractors could come in, they're probably not going to be significantly different, but they could come in a little bit less, or they could potentially come in a little bit more. And so they had alternates of the staircase and the roof, kind of hinge on how those bids come in. Worst case scenario, those things don't become part of this project. You don't need legislative approval to spend up to $100,000 on improvements in the building. So if we remain the owner of that building, potentially a year later, we can look at doing the roof adaptively or something like that.
The discussions that you've begun with the BOI about them potentially buying it, what kind of impact would their attitude be regarding us progressing with this plan? Because they may want to add additional things to it, they may want to subtract from it.
So I've had discussions with them, and like I said, these are early on discussions. There's nothing, for sure. Nothing is for sure at all. But the preliminary discussions are such that if we were to move forward with this project and get it to where we've designed it to be at this point, and even if we enter into a lease agreement with another agency, if they ultimately decide to purchase that, they're going to purchase it as an investment property to lease out anyway, so they can just purchase the building and then take over that lease agreement. So I don't know that there's any impact. They haven't expressed interest in trying to change how that building would be reconfigured.
And your assumption would be that the purchase price would reflect a dollar for dollar recapture of the investment that we've made to upgrade the building.
So my understanding is, we're fiduciaries of the system, obviously. That is an asset of the system. I think no matter what, our fiduciary duty is to get the fair market value for that building, which it's going to be based on the appraisal. I would assume the appraisal would be a dollar for dollar. You start with your before value and your after value. It could be more than a dollar for dollar, right? But we would need to get the fair market value of that.
I would hope that it would be somewhat more than a dollar for
So would I, but
yeah.
until we have it, until the work's complete and the building's reappraised, I don't
Well, I guess that's my concern. If the BOI was interested in buying it as an investment property, would they potentially see it as a benefit to do their own reconstruction so that they could make it specific to whatever their investment design was? In which case, maybe we should reconsider whether or not we should actually spend the money, because if we get it appraised without the improvements, and they're willing to buy it without the improvements, it would certainly save you a lot of stress.
It would, I mean, we're right up against it at this point. They haven't communicated to me that they have any desire to purchase it pre-remodel. Most of
Okay.
everything, discussions have been post-remodel.
Post-remodel,
And
okay.
we're right up to it. I mean, we'll be getting bids in the next week or two
Okay.
on that remodel project, so.
So their assumption is basically that they would be theoretically even looking at buying it after.
Yes, absolutely, after the remodel. And again, those discussions are in their infancy. I don't know if for sure that anything's gonna amount with those discussions. And we may just be, when the building is completed, the remodel project's completed in the April or May timeframe, that we are leasing it out to another state agency. And those talks progress, because regardless if we own the building or if BOI owns the building, we have an agency interested in moving into there. So I'll continue to work on getting that finalized, and that there will be a tenant in that building.
I thought BOI was sort of actively reducing their inventory of local buildings.
So BOI has a new executive director. I mean, you change leadership at the top, and sometimes things, your direction changes a little bit. I think my understanding, and I'm not gonna speak for BOI, is they moved like the buildings in Helena out from investments in the retirement systems a few years ago under Director Ewer, which was a good thing to do, because sometimes the lease rates are artificially held below where we should be. And they're instead fall under like the coal trust fund, and the coal trust fund primarily is invested in pretty low yielding investments, where now they are able to own some real estate instead of earning 1% or possibly up to 2%, they can earn closer to 4%. So it does make sense in some respects. Does that sound about right to you, Jim?
It does. I mean, the only discussion was in the last couple of years, whether to keep them in the retirement funds or move them out. Some of the board members want to get rid of them completely because, they don't want to be the management of properties. Others think it makes sense to have it there because it does, in many respects, benefit our members, because the rents may be lower for facilities. So, I mean, that's a tough one. They haven't brought up at all any discussion about buying the old TRS Board. I've not been involved in it.
And that's a correct statement. The discussions that have been underway have been between myself and staff and whatever, so I don't believe they've ever
Very
anything to
preliminary.
you yet, as a board member. But I wanted this board to be aware that those conversations are underway, and actually I've had Denise doing some legal research on our ability to sell that building, and what process we can go through if we get to that point.
That would be an ideal outcome, it seems to me.
And you couldn't spend the extra $60,000 in the same year?
Potentially, we could potentially. It just has to definitely not be included as part of that project.
Okay.
So I want to see how these bids come in, and then I'll cross that bridge when we get there. I need to get with Amy and figure out, as long as it doesn't count as part of the remodel, the 550, because I don't, for sure, we don't want to go over that, because the legislature only authorized 550, but if it can be counted as something separate, I think we would, under just our regular statutes, we would have the ability to address it. So, with that, I think I put some dates in the write-up. Let's see. Yeah, the bid should be open around 18th. That's when they should be receiving the bids, and then they're hoping to have work started right after the first of the year, with a projected completion date of April 15th.
commented on.
No, thank you. I like your new location.
Do we have any disability applications?
So Madam Chair, we do not. We thought we would have all the paperwork we needed on one, so that's why it's on your agenda. We did not get what we needed, so once we receive that, we may end up administrating that one and have the board formally move to the next meeting board. We don't think we have enough information. We'll hold off on action until the next board meeting.
All right, well, that's all that we've got on our agenda then today.
Right, so maybe on the record, if you want to just state.
Yeah. We were going to have a lunch break and then have a meeting with Merrill Ferrier. He requested, or he sent a letter stating that he was not going to be here today. And Sean is going to contact him via phone.
One quick question, the next date that we just established earlier, February 21st, it occurs to me that that weekend is a 3-day weekend, Washington's birthday weekend. Does that impact anybody? Is that relevant?
It's probably Monday.
Probably
It's the day off,
Monday, right?
Yeah.
Right, so Friday would be fine. Okay, curious.
All right, well, we just need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. And seconded, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes